Welcome to another episode of My Weird Prompts, an AI-generated podcast featuring the random prompts of Daniel Rosehill as answered by a revolving cast of friendly AI characters. Join us for deep dives into AI, technology, and whatever other random thing Daniel finds fascinating today. Subscribe on Spotify or your favorite podcatcher. Now, today's episode.
This episode was generated using artificial intelligence. Please verify facts.
Hi there, Herman and Corn. So I'd love to ask you guys today, this is one of those classic My Word prompt questions where I say, should I ask that? Should I Google that? Probably not, but screw it. It's going to make an interesting episode. And I'm just waiting for, the kind of three fellas in trench coats to show up my door saying, are you the guy talking to Herman and Corn? And I'll say, oh gosh, which episode got me in trouble? I'm just kidding lightly. I hope not. But let's talk today about the concept of state secrets. Here's what I'm curious about, really, Herman and Corn. So we use this expression in everyday speech. It's not a state secret to say that it's not exactly a plan. It's not under wraps. The cat's out of the bag. It's an anecdote. We have a colorful idiom in Hebrew, actually, that's it's not a secret of the Shabak, the Domestic Intelligence Agency. To mean the same thing, basically. It's it's okay to know this or whatever. And I've always wondered, this is again the My Word prompt angle to this. Well, is there actually a defined list of state secrets? Because we all know that countries have secrets that they need to preserve and keep even from their closest allies, and certainly in the context of Israel, where we're always thinking about, it's very easy to imagine exactly what those secrets might be. It might be stuff like the exact nature of the nuclear capability that we're not supposed to officially have. How much I say I cannot. What is it? The principle of ambiguity, that Israel can neither confirm nor denies existing. Great line for the pub, by the way. If your wife's asking where you are, I like to say I can neither confirm nor deny that I might be at the local pub. So that's what Israel's official line is. Now we know from the annals of Israeli history, which are fascinating, and Ronan Bergman comes to mind as one of the guys I could just read forever. His books are absolutely superb. And the 1973 preemptive strikes against Egypt, in which Egypt was building up forces. 1967. I'm getting confused. Egypt was building up forces on the Sinai Peninsula, planning a push, and Israel preemptively striked. Now, what's really interesting about that, the history of that operation, is that from everything I've read about it, very few people knew. Takeoff occurred. I'm just looking here from my notes. You see, Herman and Corn, we're getting organised. Where was it? There, takeoff occurred at about 7 in the morning, 7:45, and the briefing occurred at 4 a.m. So only 3 hours, little under 4 hours to the operation. What impresses me about that is it means that, assuming that some guys went to sleep, people went to sleep who would be flying the sortie and participating directly, who through compartmentalization weren't briefed on the details of the plan until literally 4 hours before departure from Israel. We don't have the exact number. I don't think the IDF ever really kind of provided it, but we can just imagine a handful of senior officers commanding the operation getting the brief, but maybe thousands of people involved in the logistics and preparation for it without knowing exactly what they were doing. And that's always what I wonder when I think about state secrets in Israel. Compartmentalization. I guess the reason I find the work of the intelligence community so interesting is because having worked with companies involved in cybersecurity, so much of what actually informs cybersecurity best practice actually is derived from the work of the military and the intelligence community. And you don't have to go very far when we talk about words like the blast surface and the DMZ, that these terminologies come directly from the military. So likewise, the principle of least privilege and the idea of information on a need-to-know basis really finds a very strong echo in zero trust, which has become a dominant force in computer security. So in that vein, Herman and Corn, I'd love to know a little bit about what's known about state secrets. Clearly the state secrets themselves are not known about, but is there like a list? When we talk about information security or InfoSec, in a government, in a place within a government that might hold highly sensitive information, like a military intelligence directorate, is there an actual internal list that this is whatever the classification is? Because we've all seen those things that they've declassified and they're marked top secret. But whatever the very highest tier on that list is, and what might be colloquially known as a state secret, is there a list of those things, or is it just a colloquial term that we throw around without really thinking about if it actually exists or not? Herman and Corn, let's talk about the secrets that states need to keep. And if the guys come in trench coats, just tell them I'm probably working at the computer trying to get my new home server built, and I was genuinely just curious. Over to you two.
Welcome back to my weird prompts. I'm Corn, and I'm sitting here in our living room in Jerusalem with my brother.
Herman Poppleberry, present and accounted for. And let the record show, Corn, that I am not currently wearing a trench coat, nor am I hiding any secret documents in the cushions of this sofa.
Well, that is good to know, because our housemate Daniel seems a little worried that asking about state secrets might result in some mysterious figures showing up at our door. He sent us this prompt earlier today, and honestly, it is one of those questions that feels like it should have a simple answer, but the deeper you look, the more complex it gets.
It is the classic iceberg problem. You see the idiom on the surface, it is not a state secret, and you assume there is a massive, well-defined block of ice underneath. But in reality, the definition of a state secret is often more about the process of keeping it than a static list of things that are secret.
That is it. Daniel was asking if there is an actual physical list. Like, does the Prime Minister or the President have a leather-bound folder that just says secrets on the cover? Or is it more of a fluid concept? And I love how he tied it back to the cybersecurity world, because that is where we see these military concepts living on in our everyday digital lives.
It is a fascinating bridge to build. To answer the first part of his question, we have to look at how governments actually define this stuff. In most modern states, there is not a single master list of every secret. That would be a security risk in itself. Imagine if that list got leaked. Instead, what exists are classification guides and legal frameworks. In the United States, this is currently governed by Executive Order 13526.
Right? So instead of a list that says the location of the nuclear silo is X, there is a guide that says any information regarding the location of strategic assets is classified as top secret.
That is right. The framework says information can be classified if its unauthorized disclosure could reasonably be expected to cause damage to the national security. They have three main levels: confidential, secret, and top secret. Confidential means damage, secret means serious damage, and top secret means exceptionally grave damage.
I have always found those adjectives a bit funny. Who decides what qualifies as grave versus just serious? It feels very subjective.
It is incredibly subjective, and that is actually one of the biggest points of friction in government transparency. But there is one category of secrets that is different, and this touches on what Daniel mentioned regarding Israel and nuclear capabilities. There is a concept called born secret.
That sounds like a spy movie title. What does it actually mean?
It comes from the United States Atomic Energy Act of 1954. It basically says that any information related to the design, manufacture, or use of nuclear weapons is classified from the moment it is created, regardless of who created it. You could be a scientist in your garage who happens to figure out a new way to enrich uranium, and legally that information is restricted data the second it enters your brain. You do not need a government official to stamp it. It is born secret.
That is wild. It is like the government claiming ownership over a thought before you even have it. But back to Daniel's point about Israel. He mentioned the concept of amimut, or nuclear ambiguity. That is a state secret that everyone knows exists, but the secret itself is the official confirmation.
Yes, that is it. It is a policy where the state neither confirms nor denies the existence of certain capabilities. In the legal world, especially in the United States, they call this the Glomar Response. It comes from a 1975 case involving a ship called the Hughes Glomar Explorer, which was built by Howard Hughes to supposedly mine the ocean floor, but was actually a Central Intelligence Agency project called Project Azorian to recover a sunken Soviet submarine. When reporters asked about it, the agency said they could neither confirm nor deny the existence of the records.
And that phrase has become a staple of pop culture and bureaucracy alike. But let's talk about the list idea again. In Israel, we have the military censor, the Tzimtzura. That feels closer to a list, does it not?
It does. The chief censor actually issues a set of guidelines to the press. It is not a list of every secret, but it is a list of topics that must be submitted for review before publication. There is also an office called Malmub, the Director of Security of the Defense Establishment, which manages the actual protection of these secrets. So while there is no master list of secrets on a website somewhere, there is a very clear list of things you are not allowed to talk about.
Daniel also brought up that incredible example from the 1967 Six-Day War, the idea that pilots were briefed only 3 or 4 hours before takeoff. That is the ultimate form of compartmentalization. If you do not know the secret until you are about to execute it, you cannot accidentally or intentionally reveal it.
That is the need-to-know principle in its purest, most high-stakes form. And this is where the connection to cybersecurity gets really interesting. Daniel mentioned terms like blast surface, demilitarized zone, and least privilege. These are not just metaphors, they are direct translations of military doctrine into code.
Let's break those down. Least privilege is a big one in the tech world right now. In the old days of computing, if you logged into a network, you often had access to everything. But now, the goal is to give a user the absolute minimum level of access they need to do their specific job.
That is the key thing. It is the digital version of that pilot in 1967. He does not need to know the entire diplomatic strategy for the Middle East. He needs to know his target, his flight path, and his timing. In a modern corporation, a marketing intern should not have the ability to delete the entire customer database. They have least privilege.
And then there is the blast radius, which Daniel called the blast surface. I love that term because it is so visceral. If a specific server gets hacked, how much of the rest of the network can the attacker see or touch?
It is just like the design of a munitions bunker. You build them in a way where if one shell accidentally explodes, the blast is contained so it does not set off the entire warehouse. In cybersecurity, we use microsegmentation to do the same thing. We put little digital walls around every single application so that a breach in one area does not lead to a total system failure.
It is funny how we have moved from a perimeter model to a zero-trust model. I remember you explaining this to me a few years ago. The old way was like a castle with a moat. Once you were inside the castle, you were trusted. But Zero Trust says, I do not care if you are inside the castle. I am going to check your ID every time you move from the kitchen to the hallway.
It is a paranoid way to live, but it is the only way to stay secure. In the United States, this became official policy with an executive order in 2021. There is no moat anymore because everyone is working from home or using cloud services, so you have to treat every single request as if it is coming from an untrusted source.
Which brings us back to the state secrets. If a government operated on a true zero-trust model, would there even be secrets in the traditional sense? Or would everything just be a series of tiny, fragmented pieces of information that only mean something when they are put together?
That is what the intelligence community calls the mosaic theory. This is one of the most common reasons the government gives for refusing to release information. They might say, sure, this one document seems harmless, but if you combine it with these other 10 harmless documents, a foreign intelligence service can piece together a very sensitive secret.
It is like a jigsaw puzzle where the individual pieces are just blue or green blobs, but when you put them together, you see a picture of a top-secret submarine base.
Right, and that is why there is no single list. The secret is often the relationship between the pieces of information, not the information itself.
You know, we should probably mention that if you are enjoying this deep dive into the world of secrets and security, we would really appreciate a quick review on your podcast app. It helps more people find the show. And unlike a state secret, we actually want people to know we exist.
Well played, Corn. But seriously, it does help. Now I want to go back to the Hebrew idiom Daniel mentioned about the Shabak, the domestic intelligence agency. In Israel, the phrase, "it is not a secret of the Shabak," is used for anything that is common knowledge. But the irony is that for decades, the very existence of the head of the Shabak was a state secret.
Right. I remember that. People used to refer to him only as Resh, the first letter of his name. It was not until the mid-1990s that they started publishing the names of the directors.
It was 1996 to be exact. Before that, it was a state secret who was even running the agency. It is a perfect example of how the definition of what is secret changes as society changes. We move from a culture of everything is secret unless we say otherwise, to a more modern, though still imperfect, culture of things should be public unless there is a damn good reason.
But even then, some things stay hidden for a long time. I was reading about the state secrets privilege in the United States. It is a legal rule that allows the government to block the release of information in a lawsuit if it would harm national security. The landmark case for this was United States versus Reynolds in 1953.
Oh, that is a dark one.
It really is. A military plane crashed, and the widows of the men who died sued for the accident report. The government claimed the report contained state secrets about the plane's mission and refused to release it. The Supreme Court agreed with the government, but then, 50 years later, the report was finally declassified.
And what was in it?
No state secrets, just evidence that the plane was poorly maintained and that the military was trying to cover up its own negligence. That is the danger of the state secret label. It can be used to protect a country, but it can also be used to protect a bureaucracy from embarrassment.
That is the blast radius of a different kind. If you allow the government to hide its mistakes under the guise of security, you erode the trust of the entire citizenry. It is a massive vulnerability in the operating system of a democracy.
So, to answer Daniel's question, is there a list? Not in the way he is imagining. There is no big book of secrets sitting on a shelf. Instead, there are millions of fragments of information, each tagged with a classification level based on a set of subjective guidelines. The list is actually a set of rules for how to handle information, rather than the information itself.
And those rules are increasingly being built into our technology. When you use an app that has end-to-end encryption, you are essentially creating your own state secret. You are using the same mathematical principles that spies use to ensure that only the person with the need to know can read your message.
It is a democratization of secrecy. We have gone from secrets being the exclusive domain of kings and generals to something that every teenager with a smartphone can access.
But that creates a new problem. Governments hate it when they cannot get into those secrets. We see this debate all the time with encryption backdoors. The state says, we need to be able to see these secrets to stop the bad guys. And the tech community says, if you build a backdoor for yourself, you are building a backdoor for everyone.
It is the ultimate security trade-off. Do you prioritize the state's ability to know secrets, or the individual's ability to keep them?
I think the military concepts Daniel mentioned give us the answer. If you have a zero-trust model, you do not build backdoors, because in zero trust, there is no such thing as a trusted government official who will never lose their key. A backdoor is a vulnerability, period.
It is interesting how these lessons from the 1960s and 70s, from the battlefields and the intelligence bunkers, are now the foundation of how we build a secure internet. The DMZ, or Demilitarized Zone, is a perfect example. In the military, it is a buffer zone between two powers. In networking, it is a subnetwork that sits between the public internet and a private network.
It is a checkpoint for data. You let the data into the DMZ, you inspect it, you make sure it is not carrying a bomb, and only then do you let it into the inner sanctum. It is a physical analogy for a digital process.
You know, Herman, I wonder if the concept of a state secret will even survive the next 50 years. With artificial intelligence able to scrape the entire internet and find those mosaic patterns in seconds, can anything really stay hidden?
That is a fascinating question. We are entering an era of algorithmic intelligence. If an AI can look at satellite imagery of a parking lot and predict the quarterly earnings of a retail chain, it can certainly look at public data and figure out where the secret bases are. The list might not exist, but the AI will build its own.
That is a bit terrifying.
It is, but it also means that the only way to keep a secret in the future might be the 1967 method. Don't put it on a computer, don't put it in a database, keep it in the heads of a few people until the very last second.
The most advanced security technology might end up being a face-to-face conversation in a room with no windows.
That is right. High-tech problems sometimes require very low-tech solutions.
Well, before we go back to our very low-tech dinner, I want to thank Daniel for sending this in. It is a topic that is so often discussed in cliches, but the actual mechanics of it are fascinating.
Definitely. And if any of our listeners have more weird prompts about history, technology, or how the two collide, please do reach out. You can find the contact form on our website.
And remember, we are also on Spotify and most other podcast apps. If you want to dive into our archive, this was episode 507, so there is plenty more to explore.
Just don't go looking for the resh of my weird prompts. We are pretty open about who we are.
I'm Corn.
And I'm Herman Poppleberry.
Thanks for listening. We will be back soon with another one.
Goodbye, everyone.
Goodbye.
This episode was generated using Gemini Flash 3. Text-to-speech engine was Chatterbox Turbo.
Thanks for listening to another episode of My Weird Prompts, an AI-generated podcast featuring Daniel Rosehill's AI prompts, as answered by a revolving cast of friendly AI characters including me, Cornelius the Sloth. Subscribe on Spotify or visit myweirdprompts.com.